Welcome to this deep dive, where we are quite literally going under the hood of the body's own machinery.
That's a good way to put it.
You came to us wanting to understand how your body moves, and more specifically, what the architecture of motion really looks like.
Hmm.
Our sources have given us, well, the complete blueprint. The appendicular skeleton, which is basically everything you use to interact with the world, and then the truly fascinating, sometimes complex, world of joints that connect it all.
Our mission today, is to distill this really detailed anatomical information. We're not just naming parts, though.
No, definitely not.
We want to explain the kind of engineering philosophy behind them. We'll synthesize this into, let's say, 3 core concepts.
Okay.
What are the moving components? That's the bones, the structural differences in the limbs. How are they connected? That means looking at joint classifications.
Right.
And maybe most importantly, what kind of movement does that specific connection allow? It's about translating the technical stuff into the language of motion so you can sort of feel the design choices when you move.
Exactly. And we're drawing from comprehensive anatomical sources here, covering everything from, say, the elegant curve of the clavicle to the sheer immense force the heel bone, the calcaneus, has to deal with, and the whole spectrum of joints. It's a study in compromise, really, isn't it?
It absolutely is. The big picture here is recognizing this essential trade-off that's engineered right into us, the bones themselves. They give rigid support structure. They're the fixed parts.
Yeah.
But the joints, they provide both the necessary stability and the capacity for movement. And here's the thing. You can't maximize both at the same time.
Right. It's one or the other, or somewhere in between.
If you want maximum mobility, like in your shoulder, you have to sacrifice some stability.
Ah, okay.
And if you want absolute strength and load-bearing capacity, like your hip, you sacrifice range of motion. We'll see that compromise reflected everywhere we look today. Let's unpack this system, starting with the foundation.
Okay, let's start with the actual framework defining our ability to, pick things up, walk around. The appendicular skeleton.
This system is comprised of 126 bones. That's everything that hangs off the main central axis, the axial skeleton, so limbs, and the 2 crucial girdles connecting them.
We should definitely start with the girdles. They're the anchors, but they are dramatically different in their design. It all comes down to function. They really represent 2 extreme approaches to anatomical engineering.
Okay, let's start high then. The pectoral girdle. That's what attaches the upper limb, the arm. This system seems designed entirely for high mobility.
Totally.
When we talk about that trade-off, this is where the body just chooses freedom of movement. Think of it less like a solid foundation, more like a high-precision camera on a really flexible tripod arm.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
The pectoral girdle is made up of the clavicle, that's your collarbone, and the scapula, the shoulder blade.
Right.
The clavicle is this slender, doubly curved bone. That shape gives it some flexibility, but like you hinted at, also makes it one of the most frequently fractured bones,
Right.
especially that outer curve.
It attaches medially to the sternum, your breastbone, and laterally it connects to the scapula, specifically at the acromion process.
And that's the only bony connection the entire arm has to the main skeleton, isn't it? That single point on the clavicle.
That's absolutely right.
Which explains why it's so mobile. The scapula, the shoulder blade, is basically just floating back there, held mainly by muscle.
Correct. The scapula itself is this large, thin, triangular bone just sliding over the ribs. It has key projections, like that acromion we mentioned, and also the coracoid process. Both are super important attachment sites for muscles and ligaments.
Okay.
But the key feature for movement is the glenoid cavity. This is the socket.
Right.
But it's a very shallow socket where the head of the humerus, your upper arm bone, sits. Because it's so shallow, it only holds maybe a third of the humeral head.
Wow, only a third.
Yeah, it sacrifices that deep, bony stability to achieve that massive range of motion we have in the shoulder.
Which immediately gives us context for shoulder dislocations then.
Yeah.
That freedom comes at a clear price.
Yeah.
Less structural security.
Precisely.
Now, contrast that highly mobile setup with the pelvic girdle, the attachment for the lower limb. This is the high stability system. If the shoulder's the flexible tripod, the pelvis is like the massive, unmoving foundation of a skyscraper.
That's the perfect way to think about it. The pelvic girdle consists of 2 huge coxal bones, or hip bones. They are fused really strongly together at the front by the pubic symphysis.
Okay, that's a joint itself.
Yes, an important fibrocartilaginous joint. We'll get more into joint types later. And posteriorly at the back, they form these really strong connections with the sacrum at the sacroiliac joints, the SI joints.
Right.
This whole structure is just built for bearing load. It has to transmit the entire weight of the upper body down to the legs. Plus, it has that critical job of protecting all the internal organs in the pelvic cavity.
And it's not just two simple bones either. Each hip bone, each coxal bone, is actually a fusion of three bones that started separately when we were kids, right?
Exactly. You have the ilium, that's the large flaring upper part you can feel at your hip crest. Then the ischium, the lower back part, and the pubis at the front.
And they all fuse together at that massive, deep socket.
Yes, the acetabulum. And that depth is the key architectural difference compared to the shoulder's glenoid cavity.
Much deeper.
Much deeper. The acetabulum cradles the head of the femur, the thigh bone, much more securely. And fun fact, if you're sitting right now listening to this, you are resting on your ischial tuberosities, these rough, prominent bumps on the ischium. They are designed precisely to bear your weight when you sit down.
Huh. So that bony bit I feel when I sit on a hard chair. That's it.
That's it. A great example of anatomy dictating function in a way we experience constantly.
Okay, so once we leave these very different girdles, we get into the limbs themselves. Let's start with the upper limb. The bone of the arm proper is the humerus. Looks like a textbook example of a long bone.
It is. And the humerus is vital for two main things: providing that range of motion starting at the shoulder and offering sites for powerful muscle attachment. Proximally, near the shoulder, we note the greater and lesser tubercles.
Okay.
These are essential anchor points for the rotator cuff muscles, the ones that stabilize and move the shoulder joint. Then distally, down at the elbow end, we have the features that form the elbow joint itself.
Right, the knobby bits.
Exactly. The capitulum, which is rounded and articulates with the radius bone in the forearm, and the trochlea, which is more spool-shaped and articulates with the ulna.
And crucially, you mentioned something called the surgical neck earlier in our prep. It's not an anatomical joint neck, but a common fracture site just below the head and those tubercles.
That's right.
Why is it called the surgical neck, and why is it so prone to breaking there?
Well, it's basically where the main tubular shaft of the bone begins, just below the bulky head. And it's a site of structural weakness because the bone tapers quite rapidly there. It gets called the surgical neck because fractures right there are really common and often need surgical intervention, especially in older people with maybe weaker bones. It's just a high-impact zone where force often gets concentrated and sometimes fails. And nerve damage, like to the axillary nerve, which wraps around there, is a common complication.
Okay, that makes sense. Below the humerus, we enter the forearm, composed of two bones, the radius and the ulna. They seem to have distinct roles that allow movements we probably take for granted, like turning our hand over.
They absolutely do. The ulna is the longer of the two. It's on the medial side, the pinky finger side. It forms the main structural part of the elbow joint.
Okay.
Its proximal end, the bit near the elbow, features that massive olecranon process that's the pointy tip of your elbow you feel.
Got it.
And it also has this C-shaped notch, the trochlear notch, which snugly grips the trochlea of the humerus. This fit is what ensures the elbow really only operates as a hinge joint, bending and straightening.
And the radius, the other bone.
The radius is lateral on the thumb side. Its head is kind of disc-shaped and articulates with the capitulum of the humerus. But here's the clever part. The head of the radius can actually spin within a ligament, the annular ligament, that holds it against the ulna.
Oh, okay.
This spinning motion, combined with the way the radius crosses over the ulna down near the wrist, allows for that complex movement of supination and pronation, turning your palm up and down.
So the ulna stays pretty fixed.
Relatively fixed, yeah. It's the anchor.
And the radius does the spinning and crossing over.
Exactly. The radius is the spinner, the ulna is the stabilizer. It's a great functional pair.
That is neat. Okay, finally we reach the Hannity. Looks complicated. 8 small carpals in the wrist area.
Yep. Arranged in 2 rows. They give the wrist flexibility and help absorb shock.
Then the 5 metacarpals forming the palm.
Correct. Numbered 1 through 5, starting with the thumb laterally, moving across to the little finger medially.
And then 14 phalanges making up the fingers themselves. Usually 3 per finger, proximal, middle, distal, but only 2 for the thumb.
Precisely.
Okay, let's switch gears now. Down to the lower limb. Starting with the thigh. The femur. You mentioned this one is famous for a reason.
Oh yeah, it is the longest, heaviest, and strongest bone in the entire human body, period.
Wow, that kind of strength suggests it must be dealing with incredible forces.
Yeah.
What are the key features that let it handle that load?
Well, proximally, the head fits very securely into that deep acetabulum socket in the pelvis. That's key for stability. But the major features for force are the greater and lesser trochanters.
Those big bumps near the top.
They're not just bumps, they are massive bony projections. They
Mm.
serve as major attachment sites for the powerful muscles that move and stabilize the hip. Think about your large gluteal muscles.
Right.
These trochanters act like lever arms, allowing huge forces to be generated and applied to the bone when you're running, jumping, or even just standing up. Further down the shaft, there's the linea aspera. It's this rough vertical ridge, another major attachment point for thigh muscles, ensuring maximum leverage along the bone's whole length.
Okay. Then we hit the knee joint, which seems surprisingly complex for essentially a hinge, and it's protected at the front by the patella, the kneecap.
The patella is a really fascinating piece of biological engineering. It's the largest sesamoid bone in the body.
Sesamoid, meaning it's inside a tendon.
Exactly. It's embedded within the quadriceps tendon, the tendon of your big thigh muscles, and it functions basically like a pulley.
How so?
By sitting in front of the knee joint, it lifts the quadriceps tendon away from the joint's axis of rotation. This increases the leverage, the mechanical advantage of those thigh muscles by maybe up to 30%.
Wow, 30%. Just from that little bone.
Yeah, it makes extending your knee, straightening your leg significantly more efficient and powerful than it would be without it.
That's incredible. Okay, below the knee, the lower leg, again, two bones.
Hmm.
The tibia and the fibula.
Yeah.
Again, very different roles, I'm guessing.
Very different. The tibia is the big one, the prominent shin bone on the medial side. This is the primary load bearer. It transmits virtually all your body weight from the knee down to the ankle. You can feel its sharp anterior crest right under your skin. It's built robustly for support.
And the fibula, that long, thin bone running alongside it on the outside.
That's the key distinction. The fibula does not bear body weight. It's really slender.
So what's it for?
It's essential for muscle attachment, providing anchor points for muscles that move the foot and ankle. And critically, it provides stability to the ankle joint. The lower end of the fibula forms the lateral malleolus, that bony bump on the outside of your ankle.
Oh, okay.
If you break your fibula, you can often still put weight on your leg, though it'll hurt. But without that lateral malleolus stabilizing the ankle joint, the joint itself becomes catastrophically unstable. It's vital for ankle integrity.
Got it. Okay, finally, the foot. Another complex structure. 7 irregularly shaped tarsals in the ankle and back half of the foot.
Yes, and the largest and most impactful are the calcaneus, that's your heel bone, which takes the initial impact and transmits ground reaction forces up the leg, and the talus, which sits on top of the calcaneus and articulates directly with the tibia and fibula. It acts as the central pivot point for the ankle joint. Below that, the 5 metatarsals, long bones forming the main body of the foot.
And those metatarsals, along with the tarsals, form the arches of the foot. Right, that seems important.
Crucial. They form 3 distinct arches. The transverse arch running side to side, and 2 longitudinal arches running front to back, medial and lateral. This arch structure is pure functional engineering. It's not a rigid block.
No.
It's a springy, dynamic structure. It absorbs shock incredibly well when you walk or run, and it helps convert that impact into forward propulsion, like a leaf spring. And the big toe, anatomically the hallux, is essential for balance and that final push-off during walking.
You mentioned earlier that the pelvic girdle is like the foundation of a skyscraper, solid, stable. But even foundations sometimes need to adapt for specific requirements, which brings us neatly to the differences between the male and female pelvis.
Yes, this is a perfect illustration of how anatomical structure directly dictates capacity or function. The pelvis is clearly optimized for different primary physiological demands, mainly locomotion versus the capacity for childbirth. And the differences aren't subtle. They significantly alter the biomechanics of the whole hip region.
So what are those specific engineering differences we see in the sources? And how do they impact function and mechanics?
Well, the sources consistently outline several distinctions, all really rooted in the need for a wider, more open passage in the female pelvis for childbirth. Structurally, the female iliac bones, those big flared parts, tend to be more flared laterally.
Creating wider hips.
Exactly, visibly broader hips. And crucially, the pubic arch angle, that's the angle formed by the pubic bones at the very front, is much wider in females. It's greater than 90 degrees, often closer to 100 degrees. In males, it's a sharper, more acute angle.
Okay, so the whole structure is generally wider, shallower, and maybe rounder overall.
Precisely. This widening also means there's more distance between key landmarks like the ischial spines deep inside and the ischial tuberosities we sit on. Additionally, the sacrum at the back tends to have a shorter, flatter curvature in females.
Right.
These features collectively create a larger, more oval-shaped pelvic inlet and outlet, basically maximizing the internal space.
So relating this directly back to function, these structural differences are an undeniable optimization for childbirth. But does this wider structure compromise the stability needed for, say, efficient walking or running? Is there a trade-off?
There is a slight biomechanical compromise, yes. The wider structure means the femurs often angle inward more sharply from the hip joint down to the knee. This is sometimes called a higher Q angle,
Okay.
and that can slightly alter gait mechanics and potentially place different stresses on the knee joint. The male pelvis, being typically deeper, narrower, and heavier boned, is maximized pretty much purely for strength and stable locomotion. It offers perhaps better leverage for large muscles and ensures maximum structural rigidity for force transmission.
So the female pelvis is really the perfect example of the body making the most efficient compromise possible between two, frankly conflicting but essential biological demands.
Yeah.
Locomotion and reproduction.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's elegant biological engineering.
All right, that nicely wraps up the framework itself.
Yeah.
Now we need to pivot to the how. How are these meticulously shaped bones actually connected to allow everything from, I don't know, an Olympic sprint to just turning your head?
Mm-hmm.
This is the world of joints or articulations, where
Yeah.
stability meets motion, or sometimes where stability is the motion or lack thereof.
Exactly. Remember, a joint is simply any site where two or more bones come together, where they articulate. And their classification system is really quite elegant because it tells us two things at once.
Mm.
It tells us what they're made of structurally, what physically connects the bones, and also how they function, meaning how much movement they allow.
Right, so it's not just structure, like is it fibrous tissue or cartilage or a fluid-filled cavity,
Yeah.
but also function. Is it non-movable, slightly movable, or freely movable?
Mm-hmm.
This gives us that spectrum, from synarthrosis, meaning non-movable, all the way to diarthrosis, which is freely movable.
Precisely. Let's start at one end. Hashtag tag 2.2 fibrous joints, synarthrosis, the rigid connection. Starting at the synarthrosis, or non-movable end of that spectrum, we find the fibrous joints. These joints prioritize rigid structural integrity and protection above pretty much everything else. Mobility is not the goal here.
Okay, so the bones are joined really tightly by dense fibrous connective tissue. They're either completely immovable or maybe allow just the tiniest bit of give under pressure. What are the specific types we should know?
Think of these like the welded seams in a suit of armor.
Okay, good analogy.
Rigid, strong, maximum defense. First, we have sutures. The classic example is the interlocking seams between the bones of your skull.
Right, those wiggly lines.
Exactly. In infants, these are slightly flexible, allowing the skull to deform a bit during birth and to grow. But as we mature, they fuse completely into immovable lines of dense connective tissue, maximum protection for the brain.
Makes sense. What are the other types?
Second is syndesmosis. Here, bones are connected by a cord or a sheet of fibrous tissue. Usually that's a ligament or something called an interosseous membrane.
Okay. Example.
The most prominent example is the inferior tibiofibular joint. Down at the ankle, a strong ligament binds the bottom ends of the tibia and fibula tightly together. This provides crucial stability for the ankle joint without allowing any significant motion between those two bones right there.
Got it. And the third type?
Third is gymphosis. This is a highly specialized type, basically a peg and socket joint. There's really only one place you find this. The periodontal ligament holding your teeth securely in their bony sockets in the jaw.
Huh. A tooth in its socket is considered a joint.
Anatomically, yes.
Yeah.
And that periodontal ligament, while holding the tooth firmly, does allow for a very slight amount of give, which acts as shock absorption when you chew. Hashtag tag 2.3 cartilaginous joints, amphiarthrosis, the flexible buffer.
Okay, moving one step up the movement ladder now. We find cartilaginous joints. Functionally, these are called amphiarthrosis, these slightly movable joints. These seem like fantastic flexible buffers, allowing maybe some compression or slight bending.
That's exactly their role. Here, the uniting material is cartilage, not fibrous tissue, and we see two distinct types based on which kind of cartilage is involved. Understanding the difference explains their function.
Okay.
First are the primary cartilaginous joints, also called synchondroses. The key here is that they are joined by a plate or bar of hyaline cartilage.
Hyaline cartilage, that's the smooth, glassy kind you find on the ends of bones and movable joints too, right?
Exactly. But in synchondroses, it's usually temporary. The perfect examples are the epiphyseal plates, the growth plates and long bones, joining the epiphysis, the end, to the diaphysis, the shaft. They allow the bone to lengthen during childhood and adolescence.
Ah, so they are joints, but their primary function is growth.
Right. Another example is the union between the first rib and the manubrium, the upper part of the sternum. It allows a tiny bit of flexibility when you breathe, but mostly it provides stable anchoring and facilitates growth. Most synchondroses eventually ossify and disappear in adulthood.
Okay. Then we get to the secondary cartilaginous joints, also known as symphyses. This sounds like where the real shock absorption comes in.
Absolutely. Here, the bones are united by tough fibrocartilage. Although the actual bone surfaces touching the fibrocartilage are still covered by a thin layer of hyaline cartilage.
Fibrocartilage, that's different. Tougher.
Much tougher. Fibrocartilage is unique because it strongly resists both compression and tension. Examples include the pubic symphysis at the front of the
Yeah.
pelvis.
Connecting the two hip bones.
Yes, it allows for very slight movement, which
Wow.
is important, for instance, during childbirth for pelvic expansion. And the other major example, the intervertebral discs between the vertebrae of your spine.
Ah, the discs. That's a fantastic example for listeners. They're slightly movable joints, letting the spine bend and twist, but they must absorb huge impact forces.
They do. Think about running or jumping. Every time you land, your vertebrae try to compress those discs. That fibrocartilage allows for that slight flex and compression, absorbing massive amounts of kinetic energy.
Right.
Without that buffering capacity, the force would just transmit straight through the bones, likely leading to rapid wear or even fracture. They are absolutely essential, slightly movable joints, enabling high-impact activities. Hashtag Tech 2.4 synovial joints, diarthrosis, the free motion machine.
Okay, finally, we reach the diarthrosis end of the spectrum. Synovial joints. If cartilaginous joints are the flexible buffers, synovial joints sound like the body's high-tech self-lubricating system, the ultimate machine built for free motion.
That's a great description. This is definitely where the structural complexity peaks. In a synovial joint, yes, the articular surfaces of the bones are covered by smooth hyaline cartilage, like we saw hints of before, but crucially, the bones are separated by a space. Yes, the joint cavity. And this cavity is filled with fluid. That's the key feature enabling free movement.
Okay, let's break down the key components here, because this sounds like where the advanced engineering really lies. You mentioned the cavity is lined by something.
It is, lined by the synovial membrane. This membrane is what produces the synovial fluid.
And this fluid isn't just like water sloshing around.
Not at all. It's a dynamic, viscous filtrate derived from blood plasma, but with added specialized molecules, particularly hyaluronic acid, which makes it slippery, along with proteins, electrolytes, and glucose for nourishing the cartilage cells.
Okay, so what's its job? Lubrication, obviously.
Lubrication is primary, yes, but also nourishment for the articular cartilage, which doesn't have its own blood supply. And shock absorption, too.
How does it lubricate so effectively? Friction seems like the enemy in any moving machine.
It uses a clever mechanism called weeping lubrication. When the joint is compressed, like when you put weight on your knee, the pressure squeezes some of the fluid out of the cartilage matrix and into the joint cavity, creating a slippery film. When the pressure is released, the fluid is rapidly reabsorbed back into the cartilage like a sponge soaking it up. This constant cycle keeps the cartilage hydrated and nourished, but critically, it creates a virtually frictionless surface between the cartilage layers. Bone-on-bone contact is completely avoided under normal, healthy conditions.
That is genuinely incredible. It's like a self-pressurizing, self-lubricating bearing.
Exactly. And then, often associated with these joints, we find bursae. What are those?
Bursae are small, flattened sacs, also lined with synovial membrane and filled with a thin layer of synovial fluid. They are strategically located wherever things rub together, ligaments, tendons, muscles, skin, or bone. So they're like little friction-reducing pillows.
Precisely. They act as cushions, reducing friction and preventing wear and tear on adjacent structures, especially where a tendon might glide over a bony prominence during movement. Think of them as localized, high-pressure, fluid-filled ball bearings protecting specific rub points.
Okay, so knowing how these free motion joints are built, the cavity, the fluid, the cartilage, is only half the story. The next logical step is understanding how their specific shape, the geometry of the bone, ends, limits, or dictates the type of movement they allow.
Exactly. Now we're linking the structure we just discussed directly to anatomical action. We classify synovial joints based on the number of axes around which they permit movement, and that number is entirely determined by the precise shape and fit of the articulating bone surfaces. Hashtag 3.1 synovial joint classification based on shape.
Let's start with the simplest motion, non-axial joints. These only allow gliding or sliding movements, basically shifting side to side. This is called translation.
Right, these are the plane or gliding joints. The articulating surfaces are essentially flat or maybe slightly curved. They just slide past one another.
No rotation, no hinging.
No, just gliding. Good examples are the joints between the small carpal bones in your wrist and the intertarsal bones in your foot. They allow for a bit of overall flexibility and stability in the wrist and foot complex without allowing large, complex rotations at those specific tiny joints.
Okay. Next up, uniaxial joints. These allow movement along only a single axis, like a door swinging on its hinges. The first type is literally called the hinge joint.
Yep, hinge joints permit movement in one direction only, typically flexion and extension, bending and straightening. Think about the rigid security of a door hinge. It only swings one way, right?
Right.
Classic examples are your elbow joint, the knee joint, though it has a tiny bit of rotation possible when flexed, it's primarily a hinge, and the joints between the phalanges of your fingers and toes. The shape of the bone surfaces, like that trochlear notch of the ulna gripping the trochlea of the humerus, is often deeply contoured, really forcing motion into that single plane. Great for stability when handling large loads.
Makes sense. The second uniaxial type is the pivot joint. This one sounds different. It allows for pure rotational movement around its own long axis.
Exactly. This is rotation without any significant gliding or bending. The superior radial winner's joint, where the head of the radius spins against the ulna near the elbow.
The one that lets us turn our hand over.
That's the one. That's a prime example of a pivot joint enabling supination and pronation. Another key example is the atlantoaxial joint. That's the joint between the first two vertebrae in your neck, the atlas C1 and the axis C2. It's what allows you to rotate your head side to side to say no.
Ah, okay. So contrast the locked-in bending of the hinge joint, like your elbow, with the specialized twisting of the pivot joint, like turning your head or turning a key.
Perfect contrast.
Moving up in complexity now, biaxial joints. Movement along two different axes, usually allowing motion in two perpendicular planes, like forwards, backwards, and side to side. First are the condylar joints.
Condylar joints feature an oval-shaped projection, a condyle, fitting into a complementary oval depression. This shape allows movement along two axes, typically flexion, extension, and abduction, adduction, but rotation around the long axis is generally limited or prevented by the shape and ligaments.
Where do we find these?
We see these at the wrist joint, between the radius and the carpals, and also at the knuckles, both in the hand, the metacarpophalangeal or MCP joints, and the corresponding joints in the foot, the metatarsophalangeal or MTP joints.
Okay, and then we reach a really specialized biaxial joint, the saddle joint. Sounds unique. It allows two axes of movement, but the surfaces are shaped like, well, a rider sitting in a saddle, both convex and concave curves on each bone.
That's exactly right. And there's only one truly perfect example of a saddle joint in the human body, but it's incredibly important. It defines much of our species' dexterity.
Which one is it?
It's the carpometacarpal joint of the thumb, the joint at the base of your thumb, connecting the trapezium carpal bone to the first metacarpal. That unique saddle shape allows for a fantastic range of motion. Flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, and also the crucial movement of opposition, bringing the thumb across the palm to touch the fingertips.
So that unique joint shape is literally why humans have opposable thumbs. That tiny bit of specialized bone geometry unlocks this massive functional capacity for grasping, tool use, writing, everything.
It is arguably the ultimate example in the skeleton of a minor tweak in form driving an enormous leap in function. Just incredible evolutionary engineering.
Wow. Okay, finally, the joints that give us the greatest freedom of all, multi-axial joints.
Movement is possible along 3 or more axes.
And these are the ball and socket joints? The name says it all, really.
Pretty much. These joints feature a spherical head, the ball fitting snugly into a cup-like depression, the socket. Because the surfaces are essentially symmetrical spheres, they allow the widest range of movement possible. Flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, and rotation around the long axis.
And the classic examples.
The shoulder joint, the glenohumeral joint, and the hip joint, the acetabulo-femoral joint.
And going right back to our core theme of the trade-off.
Exactly.
The shoulder is super mobile because its glenoid socket is shallow, making it relatively unstable and prone to dislocation. The hip socket, the acetabulum, is deep and secure, making the hip incredibly stable, but it restricts the total amount of rotation and extreme movement compared to the shoulder. It's the perfect demonstration of that mobility versus stability compromise right there in those two joints.
Couldn't agree more. It's the fundamental principle playing out. Now, to really apply all this knowledge of joint types, we
Yeah.
need the specific language, the terminology, to describe these actions precisely. We generally categorize movements into angular movements, where the angle between bones changes,
Okay.
and circular movements, which involve rotation around an axis.
Let's tackle angular movements first. This is where we're decreasing or increasing the angle at a joint.
Right. Flexion decreases the joint angle, usually bending a body part forward in the sagittal plane. For example, bending your elbow or lifting your heel up towards your buttock, knee flexion. Extension is the opposite. It increases the joint angle, straightening the limb or body part. When you stand up straight from a squat, your hip and knee joints are extending.
And if you go beyond straight, like bending your wrist back too far.
That's hyperextension, extending beyond the normal anatomical position or range of motion.
Okay. Then we have movements defined relative to the midline of the body. Abduction versus adduction.
Abduction, think abduct, to take away, is moving a limb away from the midline of the body and the frontal plane. Adduction, think add, is moving it back toward the midline.
So if I raise my arm straight out to the side, up towards the ceiling,
That's abduction at the shoulder.
and bringing it back down to my side.
That's adduction.
Got it. Now for circular movements, which involve rotation around some axis.
Rotation itself is simply turning a bone around its own long axis, like turning your head left and right at that atlantoaxial pivot joint, or rotating your whole arm inwards or outwards at the shoulder joint.
Okay. What about circumduction? Sounds like a combination.
It is. It's a complex movement that combines flexion, extension, abduction, and adduction performed in sequence. The result is that the distal end of the limb describes a circle while the proximal end stays relatively stationary. The whole limb outlines a cone shape. Think about drawing a big circle in the air with your straight arm. That's circumduction at the shoulder.
Okay. And we have those specific localized rotational movements that rely on the joint interactions we discussed earlier, like in the forearm.
Exactly. Supination versus pronation. These depend entirely on that pivot joint between the radius and ulna. Supination is turning the palm anteriorly or superiorly, the anatomical position, or like holding a bowl of soup, hence supination.
Okay.
Pronation is turning the palm posteriorly or inferiorly, palms facing down or backward.
Right. And in the foot, related perhaps to that ankle stability provided by the fibula, inversion versus eversion.
Yes, these happen mainly at the joints between the tarsal bones. Inversion is turning the sole of the foot inward, medially, lifting the inner edge. Everton is turning the sole outward, laterally, lifting the outer edge.
Those seem like small movements, but probably crucial for balance.
Absolutely critical for adapting to uneven surfaces and maintaining balance. And finally, we have some simpler pairs like elevation and depression.
Like shrugging your shoulders.
Exactly. Shrugging your shoulders up towards your ears is elevation of the scapulae. Letting them drop back down is depression. These terms are the essential vocabulary we use to describe every possible physical action our skeleton allows.
So we've outlined this incredibly sophisticated framework, the appendicular skeleton and all its clever connectors, the joints. But these aren't just static structures like building materials. They're living tissues. They require constant regulation, ongoing maintenance, repair, and ultimately they are subject to wear and tear over time.
That's exactly right. The skeletal system isn't isolated. It's deeply integrated with the body's endocrine system, the hormone system, and also interacts significantly with the immune system. Its upkeep is a critical part of maintaining overall body balance, or homeostasis. Hashtag 4.1 hormonal regulation of bone.
The skeleton acts as the body's main bank for minerals, doesn't it? Especially calcium. That must mean hormones are constantly working to manage bone density and growth throughout our lives.
Calcium balance is absolutely vital, yeah. Because calcium ions are essential for so many other things, like nerve signal transmission and muscle contraction. We rely on a few key hormones to manage this constantly.
Okay, first up, growth hormone, GH. We associate that with getting taller.
And rightly so. Produced by the pituitary gland in the brain, GH is the primary driver of longitudinal bone growth, especially during childhood and adolescence. It directly stimulates activity at the epiphyseal plates, those cartilaginous growth joints we talked about, synchondroses.
Right.
It drives the cartilage cells there to divide and lay down new matrix, which then gets replaced by bone, making the bone longer.
Okay. Then there's that crucial partnership you mentioned between the thyroid and parathyroid hormones. How do they work together?
Think of them as the body's calcium thermostat. If your blood calcium levels drop too low, the parathyroid glands, tiny glands on the back of the thyroid, release parathyroid hormone, PTH.
Okay. And what does PTH do?
PTH signals specialized cells in the bone called osteoclasts, the bone-resorbing cells, to basically dissolve a tiny bit of bone matrix. This releases calcium from the bone bank back into the bloodstream, bringing levels back up.
Ah, so it borrows calcium from the bones when needed elsewhere.
Exactly. Conversely, if blood calcium levels get too high, calcitonin, a hormone from the thyroid gland itself, inhibits those osteoclasts, slowing down calcium release from bone. This delicate balance ensures the skeleton maintains its structural integrity while also tightly regulating the systemic calcium needed for other critical functions.
And we should also touch on the dramatic role of sex hormones, estrogen in females, testosterone in males, especially during puberty.
Oh, absolutely critical. They are responsible for that characteristic pubertal growth spurt. They promote a massive surge in bone growth, causing that rapid increase in height.
But they also stop it eventually.
Yes, that's the other key role. Later in puberty, these same-sex hormones trigger the final stage. They induce the closure, the ossification of those epiphyseal plates. Once the cartilage growth plates fully turn into solid bone, longitudinal growth stops. So sex hormones are responsible for both the massive acceleration and the ultimate cessation of height growth.
Okay, so bones are dynamic, but given the intense mechanical stress that gets applied to synovial joints, especially the big weight-bearing ones like the knee, hip, and maybe the shoulder, it seems sadly unsurprising that they're susceptible to chronic failure over time. We generally call this arthritis.
Arthritis is the broad term, yes, covering over 100 different types of inflammatory or degenerative joint diseases. But the underlying mechanisms, the reasons why the joint fails, can vary dramatically.
Let's start with the most common one, osteoarthritis. OA. This is often called the wear and tear disease. Is that accurate?
It's a pretty good description. OA is essentially a mechanical failure of the joint. Over decades of use, friction, and minor injuries, the smooth, protective, articular cartilage that covers the ends of the bones gradually erodes and breaks down.
So the cushioning wears out.
Exactly. As the cartilage thins and becomes rougher, friction within the joint increases exponentially. This leads to pain, stiffness, inflammation, and eventually bone grinding directly on bone in severe cases. It most often affects the major weight-bearing joints, knees, hips, lower spine, simply because the forces transmitted through them are the highest over a lifetime.
Yeah, that makes sense. The good news here, though, is that modern medicine has actually developed really effective solutions for this specific type of mechanical failure, right?
Absolutely. The success rates for joint replacement surgery, particularly total knee replacements and total hip replacements, are incredibly high now. It's a testament to advances in both surgical technique and biomedical engineering. We're essentially replacing the worn-out, friction-generating joint surfaces with highly durable, low-friction implants made of metal alloys and high-density polymers.
Designed to last for decades.
Often, yes. Restoring pain-free mobility and function to millions of people suffering from debilitating OA. It's a major success story.
Okay, but then we have other forms of arthritis that aren't primarily about mechanical wear. For instance, rheumatoid arthritis, RA. How is that different?
RA is fundamentally different because it's an autoimmune disorder. This means the body's own immune system mistakenly identifies the joint tissues as foreign and attacks them.
Attacks itself.
Yes. Specifically, it targets the synovial membrane lining the joint capsule. This triggers chronic inflammation. The inflamed synovial membrane then thickens, forming a destructive tissue called pannus, which can eventually erode not just the articular cartilage, but also the underlying bone itself.
Wow. Does it affect the same joints as OA?
It often affects smaller joints first, like those in the hands and feet, and typically does so symmetrically, meaning the same joints on both sides of the body are affected. If left untreated, RA can lead to severe joint deformation and loss of function.
Okay. And one more common type. Gouty arthritis or just gout? What's the mechanism there?
Gout is essentially a metabolic problem. It results from having excessively high levels of uric acid in the blood. Uric acid is a normal waste product, but if levels get too high, it can crystallize out of the blood and form needle-sharp crystals, specifically monosodium urate crystals, within the joint cavity and synovial fluid.
Needles in the joint. That sounds painful.
Imagine tiny shards of glass accumulating in your joint fluid. It triggers an intense, sudden, and debilitating inflammatory response, causing severe pain, redness, and swelling. It often affects one joint initially, Classically, the metatarsophalangeal joint of the big toe, the hallux. Hashtag 4.3 healing and interplay. And sometimes the structure fails more catastrophically than just wear and tear, say a major fracture of a long bone like the femur. The body has a remarkable capacity to heal this, involving those bone coverings we mentioned briefly.
Right, the endosteum lining the inside marrow cavity and the periosteum covering the outer surface.
Yeah.
How do they contribute to fracture healing?
They are both rich sources of osteogenic cells, the cells that can turn into bone-forming cells, osteoblasts. When a bone breaks, the first thing that happens is bleeding, forming a large blood clot, or hematoma, at the fracture site.
Okay.
Then, cells from both the periosteum and the endosteum rapidly proliferate and invade the hematoma. They initially form a soft callus made of fibrous tissue and cartilage, which acts like a temporary splint to stabilize the broken ends.
Like biological glue.
Sort of, yeah. Then, the soft callus is gradually replaced by a bony callus made of woven spongy bone. This is much harder but still needs remodeling. Over subsequent weeks and months, this bony callus is remodeled. Osteoclasts remove excess bone. Osteoblasts lay down compact bone, eventually restoring the bone's original shape and strength, sometimes making it even stronger at the fracture site.
That's an amazing repair process, and it really highlights the skeletal system's critical role, not just in movement, but in overall homeostasis, keeping the body stable and functional.
Absolutely. The appendicular system is clearly our interface with the external world. It lets us move, escape danger, find food, build things. But its internal roles are just as vital, providing the structural framework for the muscular system, protecting parts of the nervous system, acting as that crucial mineral reservoir regulated by the endocrine system. It's all interconnected. The structure underpinning our mobility is intrinsically linked to our overall survival and the body's internal balance.
Okay, let's try to unpack all of that. We started with the individual parts, didn't we? We noted the incredible high mobility design of the pectoral girdle, the shoulder setup. We saw the sheer power generation made possible by those huge trochanters on the femur, and the distinct specialized partnership between the radius and ulna for forearm rotation. But I think what we've really discovered is that the true magic, the essence of movement, is entirely in the connection. It's all about the joint.
I agree completely. From the rigid, almost welded stability of a fibrous suture holding your skull together, providing protection, all the way to the multi-axis, almost frictionless freedom enabled by the synovial fluid and cartilage in your hip or shoulder. The body employs a highly specialized, often unique architectural solution for every single task. And we kept seeing that efficiency fundamentally relies on compromise.
Yeah, that theme came up again and again.
The shoulder's amazing mobility comes because it sacrifices inherent stability. The hip's incredible stability means it has to sacrifice some of that extreme range of motion. Understanding these biomechanical trade-offs, these design choices, I think it helps us truly appreciate both the constraints and the incredible capabilities of our own body's movements every single day.
It really does. Now, this deep dive focused heavily on the appendicular skeleton, the parts that, propel us and let us interact with the world. We detailed those 7 tarsal bones and the 5 metatarsals that form the incredibly complex structure of the foot. And specifically, we mentioned the 3 arches, the transverse, the medial longitudinal, and the lateral longitudinal.
The spring system.
Exactly. So here's something to consider as you take your next step, literally. The strongest, heaviest bone in your body, the femur, transmits massive, repetitive impact forces down your leg every single time you walk or run. Yet, the intricate architecture of those relatively small tarsal and metatarsal bones, connected by joints that allow only tiny amounts of movement between them, somehow manages to absorb, distribute, and dissipate that colossal force. They act together like a dynamic, self-adjusting biological leaf spring.
It's remarkable engineering.
It is. So think about that essential interplay. Immense strength coming down from the femur, meeting this system of minute, stabilizing flexibility in the foot arches. How crucial is that cooperative design to prevent catastrophic skeletal failure every time you merely take a stride? And perhaps, how often do we completely neglect or take for granted that foundational spring system right under our feet? Something to ponder.